Welcome to the High Existence Podcast, where we challenge the way you live. We bring you the wisdom and tools to help you grow into a more enlightened version of yourself. Join us by taking the Ultimate Life Experiment, our 30 Challenges to Enlightenment course, a complete spiritual path to help you overcome the limitations of your mind and to embody the highest philosophical realizations. Use the code WISDOM at checkout to get a huge 25% off the course, available only to podcast subscribers at store.highexistence.com. I'm your host, John Waterlow. You can find me over on High Existence and on my own podcast, Voices in the Dark. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Existence Podcast. This is a very special interview, which is kind of from the vaults. It was recorded a while ago by both of the founders of High Existence, Martijn Scherp and Jordan Lejeune, and it is with Geoff Thompson. He's kind of a charismatic enigma. He was a nightclub doorman. He worked in factories. He was a martial artist, and since then has become an award-winning playwright, author, and a spiritual teacher. So it's really hard to put him in a box, and that's kind of the focus of this interview, how we all can put ourselves in boxes largely through fears, whether we acknowledge them or not. Geoff did something pretty incredible to get out of what seemed to be a life that was going nowhere, at least for him. He wasn't finding fulfillment. He turned fear into his mentor. He created a fear pyramid in which he put all the things he was afraid of, from the least scary up to the most scary, and he started systematically facing all of them. His story is incredible, from a background in which, as a child, he suffered sexual abuse and ended up in relationships, romantic or otherwise, with people who definitely didn't want him to change his life. He broke out, and how he managed to do it is an inspiring and dramatic story with a lot of violence involved. And now he is a mentor figure, as well as continuing to write movie scripts and plays. And the way in which he teaches his spirituality is pretty amazing, because he's not trying to get across some sort of dogma or tell you that he has the answers, but he does have his own story, and he is incredibly well read, from Buddhism to Hinduism to Carlos Castaneda to the great poets from around the world. So this is an incredibly rich interview, which was amazing for me to listen to, because I wasn't there for the recording back then, and I just know you're going to love it. I'm blown away, and Geoff Thompson has definitely entered the ranks of people that I want to watch and I definitely want to learn from. So without further ado, please enjoy the interview.
So hi, Geoff. Thank you for being on a High Existence podcast. Today I'd like to talk to you about spirituality, self-help, and fear and violence, something you've been getting quite known for, and writing and mastery. Could you tell us a bit about yourself, and how did you end up being like a spiritual coach or teacher?
Well, I started out like most people, working in normal jobs, working in factories until I was 32, did a myriad different jobs, but always had this thing in the background that there was more, that there's more potential, there's more possibility. But every time I approach my potential, every time I try to get outside of the social mores, outside of, conventional employment, conventional life, I felt this barrier of fear. And when I talked to other people about this fear and said, I'm feeling afraid, when I step towards the periphery of my reality, I feel fear. Nobody wanted to talk to me about fear. So I ended up thinking it was just me. It was just me that was afraid. So I had all of these dreams of doing amazing things and being free in the world. And I knew that there was potential. But every time I approached that potential, I felt fear. And the fear, if I pursued it, the fear would quite quickly become depression. And then the depression would be debilitating. And the depression felt like an outside force. It felt like it could come in and sweep me over and leave me kind of disabled, literally for a couple of months, and then just go away again. And I always felt at the mercy of that. I felt under the dominion of these fears. So I had all this creative aspiration, and I wanted to write, and I wanted to be a martial arts instructor, and I wanted to be on that very dangerous edge, and I wanted to be sitting at 2 a.m. having tea with my heroes, that kind of thing. But it kept creating, I guess it created a logjam I became root bound, so I started to suffer quite a lot with depression. And I had what you would call, I was sympathetic sensitive. So my sympathetic nervous system was very sensitive. I was very easily aroused with fear, with sexual arousal, any kind of adrenal arousal. I was quite sensitive to. So I felt fear and I felt arousal much more than most people, I would say. Then after this one particularly bad depression, which knocked me out for about 2 months, I mean, I still carried on working. I was a very strong guy, very brave, but I didn't feel like I was brave because I was so afraid, but I still kept going to work and I didn't take tablets. I just suffered it. And then after this particularly bad depression, I just thought, I've had enough of this. I can't live like this anymore. I need to confront this. I need to do something. So at the time, I didn't realize it was a shamanic journey. And what I actually did was I wrote down all of my fears on a piece of paper. I drew a pyramid on a piece of paper. I wrote down all my fears and I started to systematically confront them. My belief was that if I could overcome the things I was afraid of, I'd be able to go and do the things I wanted to do in the world. I thought it would develop some kind of desensitization to the feelings that I was having. So I wrote down all of these kind of normal, mundane fears on a piece of paper. A fear of spiders, a fear of dentists, a fear of, I was doing some karate at the time. I had a fear of karate competitions. I had a fear of, kind of quite mundane things. But at the top of the pyramid, there was a fear of violent confrontation. So I thought what I'll do is I'll climb the pyramid one fear at a time. And the moment I started to turn into the fear and lean into the sharp edges, the fear started to diminish. Some of the fears I didn't even have to confront. They just disappeared the moment I decided to confront them. They had no existence. They were vapor. Some of the things I was afraid of, I had to confront several times. And I got desensitized to it. And I didn't realize, but I was building a second body. I was building a second self by overcoming these fears. And then what was really interesting then as well, which was exciting but also upsetting and quite sad, was that as I started to confront the mundane fears, below the surface of these mundane fears, I noticed other things that I was afraid of that were never visible before. Like I was afraid of my mum, to a debilitating stage, to a stage that I couldn't really live freely in the world, even as an adult, because I was afraid of upsetting my mum.
Wow.
I was afraid of my wife. I was afraid of the wife I would live with. So I would, anything for a quiet life, I let her bully me. And it wasn't like an overt bullying, it was just a dominance. It was like, if I say jump, you'll jump. And if she didn't want me to do something, I wouldn't do it because I was afraid of the confrontation there. I just didn't want the discomfort of that. So I started to notice that I was afraid of my wife, which was very upsetting because she had to go on the fear pyramid as well. And I was afraid of change. I didn't realize at the time that change was the only constant, and that most people live in a constant fear of change, even though, if you look at nature, if you look at the beetle, for instance, the beetle continually adapts to change. That's why it's such a powerful creature, because it's continually moving with change. It adapts its shape and its environment and its creativity according to change. It doesn't resist it, whereas as humans, we tend to resist it. So I started to gather more confidence, and as I got rid of the fears, I created more strength. I created this second self. So I was teaching karate anyway, but I started to teach it at a different level. I started to teach people about confrontation, desensitization, confronting fears to become desensitized to fear. And I didn't realize it at the time, but this is what Rumi would call night traveling. We hunt down our fears because we recognize that within our fears is a potency. There's power within fear. There's power within terror. There's power within anxiety. If we confront it, we can steal our energy back. All our energy is locked into these different fears and addictions. So I was starting to grow very strong, and I started to stand up for myself at work. I started to stand up for myself with my wife. I started to teach more broadly. I started to attract private students. I started to have aspirations about teaching full time, which terrified my wife because she was very much, you've got a job, we've got a mortgage. Why can't you just be happy with that? Why can't, she was very afraid. She didn't understand what it meant to work for myself.
Mm-hmm.
She had no conception of that. I got to the top of a pyramid, which was a fear of violent confrontation. I gave up my job in the factory and I started to work on a building site, which was very difficult because, I was working for myself. I was like subcontracting. So there was not a regular wage. And then I decided to get a job as a nightclub doorman to overcome my ultimate fear, which was the fear of violent confrontation. My ultimate aim was to get rid of fear. And of course, I realized that that didn't really happen. What happened was that I just became desensitized to fear. I became a manager of fear. I understood how to deal with it physically, physiologically, psychologically, and spiritually. I understood how to work it. And I also understood from working as a doorman that everybody felt fear. It was a biological precedent. Everybody had it. Some people just hid it better than others. Some people just managed it better than others. Some people were not afraid of fighting in a life and death fight outside a nightclub, but they were afraid of carrying a mortgage or having responsibility. Or some people were very good at handling money, but bad at handling violent confrontation. So people everybody had fear. Some people just had it in different places and in different ways. So anyway, I became a nightclub doorman to overcome this fear. I just thought I would do it for a very short time, just to see how I felt. And I went and worked in this place called Buster's Nightclub, which was like the 9th level of Dante's Inferno. It was a really dark place. Coventry was a hugely violent city. It was polled as the most violent city in Europe for its size and population. But I became a nightclub doorman, and the first night I worked, I decided it was not for me because it was so violent and it was so volatile. And all of the skills I learned as a martial artist did not fit in that space. They absolutely, unequivocally did not fit in that space. That was obvious the moment you went there. In fact, the guys on the door, the kind of seasoned doormen, they kind of ridiculed the martial arts. They didn't like it. They didn't rate it because most of the guys they'd met who did martial arts have never really done much outside of the controlled arena. So it wasn't so much that the martial arts weren't good, but they were untested in their view. So it was a baptism of fire, and I decided I wasn't going to do it again. It was too much. But at the end of the night, the head doorman, a guy called John Anderson, we called him Awesome Anderson, he praised me and said I'd done really well and that I'd got a lot of courage and that I was quite raw, but he could do something with that. And he invited me to come back again. So I decided I'd spend a couple more weeks there. And that ended up, I guess it became the best part of a decade. And I really learned a lot about myself, about the human condition, about martial arts specifically, about latterly about metaphysics, about how we create our reality. I'm away from that job now for 20 years, and I'm still learning things from it that I'm still learning now about what I've experienced, about what a powerful experience that was and how I'd created it. It's very, very exciting. So my ultimate dream was to be a writer, but I was always a writer with nothing to write about. And suddenly I've got a massive amount of stories because something violent happened every single night. Over that period of time, we were in thousands of violent situations. I was in hundreds of physical fights. 4 of my friends were murdered. It was a hugely violent time. So there was a lot to write about. So I started to write about that. So I've got an article published in a martial arts magazine, a very reputable magazine called Terry O'Neill's Fighting Arts International. And Terry O'Neill was a legendary martial arts character. He's a hero of mine. And then I wrote a book about my experiences called Watch My Back, and it was really on the surface it was the anecdotal tales of a Coventry bouncer, but actually it was really about a conflicted man. It was about conflicted men. It was about fear and why people are afraid to talk about fear. So I started to talk about it very, very openly. So, and that led me to being published. And then once I was published, my whole reality changed, because one book became eventually 40 books, films, plays, theatre, journalism. The door taught me that if I'm prepared to step over the line of nescience, or the sea of nescience, the line of fear, I can achieve anything, I can create anything. So it's a very exciting time. So what I do now when I go out and I talk to people, like you're giving me this opportunity now, and I'm very grateful. My job, as I see it, my dharma, is not to be a guru and not to have people following me. I don't want that. I am very good at telling people, showing people with my proof that it's possible, and trying to align them to their own map, not to my map or not to my ideas, but to their own map, to their own unique fingerprint, to their own dharma. So I have the proof, and it's been intuited to me that I should tell people my story, and show them my proof, and encourage them to follow their own story, to follow their own dharma. And I'm continuing to do that. I'm continuing to expand into new realities, creating new rooms. Did you ever hear that lovely thing that doorman Matters said to Carlos Castaneda? He said, your reality is one room in a house of 100 rooms. If you train with me, I can help you to access the other 99 rooms. I can help you to get out of the house. Well, I'm a teacher that has opened lots of rooms, and created lots of rooms. I've gone around those 99 rooms, and I'm out of the house. And I'm not trying to be a great bloke. I genuinely feel as though it's a dharma at this moment in my life, just to say to people, your reality is one room, and if you don't like it, you can change that room, because it's you that's creating it. It's you that's maintaining it, and that means it's you that can dissolve it, and I have the proof.
Wow,
So
that's an amazing story. Could you share some stories about how you overcame those initial mundane fears?
Yeah, it was a very exciting time, because it's the first time I decided that I was going to take on fear, and I was going to take on depression. It was very naive at the time. I didn't realize it was an advanced shamanic technique, this whole idea of collecting power from fear, and that, some of the swamis and some of the mystics and some of the some of the gurus before me had gone out and done exactly that. They'd not just waited for fear to come to them, but they'd gone and hunted down their fear, and they'd collected their power that was there. So for me, it was really just about identifying the fears. That's the first thing you do, is identify the fears. That is a fear in itself. We have a fear of admitting fear. So I used to say, I'm not afraid of going into karate competitions. I just don't like them. And I would rationalize it, and I would make up excuses about why I couldn't do something. I'm not afraid of leaving my job. It's just that there's no jobs about, there's no work about, and this is safe, and this is a job for life, and I have a family. It's not that I'm afraid, I have a family. It's not that I'm afraid, I have responsibilities. So it's getting rid of all that rationalization and looking at it and going, actually, I'm just afraid. And I realized this because my wife said to me one day, my first wife, because I used to moan about the fact that I was working in the factory, and I would say, if it wasn't for the fact that my wife doesn't want me to go, if it wasn't for the fact that I had children, I wouldn't be in this place. She wouldn't see me for dust. And one day my wife said to me, I'm tired of you telling this story. Why don't you leave that job if you're not happy? Because I'm not going to stop you. You keep using me as an excuse, but I'm happy for you to go. If you want to change jobs, change jobs. Stop blaming me. And when she did it, I felt the floor fall away from underneath me, because suddenly I realized that she was just somebody I was using as an excuse. And when she said, you change jobs if you want to, I was just left with the cold, unadulterated fear. That's when I realized it was just me. I was just afraid. And I was using excuses as a way of avoiding that. So I started to, I was in such a low place. I was so tired of being bullied by my own feelings and my own emotions. I was ready to look at these things. So the first thing is admitting what we're afraid of and not rationalizing it. And then trying to analyze, what is it that I'm actually afraid of? Really, really do some kind of deep contemplation about what it is that I'm afraid of. And when you start to contemplate and you pull back the layers of fear, ultimately you realize that you're not really afraid of losing a job or being abandoned or being physically attacked or of a spider landing on your face in the middle of the night or being hurt at a dentist, what we're actually afraid of is the feelings of fear. So when fear comes up, it threatens you with more of the same. So, my depression would be like, you're going to have this forever. This is going to be here forever. You can have these feelings forever. And you're never going to be able to escape these feelings. So my thought was I wasn't really afraid of dying when I know people that have thrown themselves under trains and they've killed themselves rather than confront their fears. So, people are less frightened of death than they are of fear, which is very interesting. So I realized I was only really afraid of the feelings. I wasn't afraid of the other things, I was afraid of the feelings, and I was afraid of being possessed or bullied by the feelings. So my philosophy was that if I can become desensitized to the feelings, if I can learn to enjoy the feelings and master the feelings, then there will be nothing that I'll be afraid of. And that's what I started to work on. I started to become comfortable with fear. And I started with small things. I was afraid of spiders. So I found a spider. And just going back to that, the fear of spiders was such that if there was a spider in the corner of the room on the ceiling, I wouldn't sleep. So, I've got this fear that it was going to fall on my face or something. It was a kind of, it was an irrational fear, but it was a fear, one that I never challenged. So I found a spider, and I picked a spider up in my hand. And then I put it down, and then I picked it up again, and then I put it down, and I kept picking it up until I was comfortable with spiders. So I got rid of the fear of the spiders by embracing and intercoursing with the fear itself and recognizing that the fear had no substance. It had no head, it had no tail, it had no innards, it had no spine, it was vapor. The moment I turned into it, and you have to completely intercourse with it, the moment I embraced it, the fear disappeared. Then I did the same thing with dentists. I went to the dentist, I hadn't been to the dentist for 10 years, and I'd got a fear of dentists that I inherited from my childhood. I had a bad experience with dentists and was afraid ever since. So I just used that as an exercise. It was just an internal exercise, a shamanic exercise. I didn't realise it, but it was in collecting power. So I went to the dentist, and it was easy. I overcome it very, very quickly. I was afraid of karate tournaments. I was a black belt at the time. So I went into the first tournament that came up, and it was called the Liverpool Open in England, which was a big Shotokan competition. And Liverpool was the mecca of British Shotokan. So I went there, and I had about 10 fights in the day. I wasn't a very good karate competitor, but I overcame my fear of competitions in one tournament. It went. So each time I overcame a fear, I grew stronger, and the next fear I came to, I was able to overcome even more. Then I got stronger again, and I was able to overcome it more. And eventually, I went from a man that was afraid of change. I went from a man that was afraid of spiders to a man that stood on a nightclub door with people threatening to kill me, and working with people that would kill you as well. It was, like I said, Coventry was a hugely violent city. So I am proof that process works. It's not an easy process, and I've used quite a lot of techniques. The main technique I used was what you would call flooding. So if I was afraid of spiders, I would flood myself with that and keep picking spiders up until it was completely gone. If the fear was too big, like when I went to become a nightclub doorman, that was a big leap. From a normal mundane fear to a fear of violence, and becoming a nightclub doorman was quite a big leap. So I kind of started to talk to a few doormen, and I started to get to know a few doormen. So I got an intellectual understanding of what a doorman did. Occasionally I would stand on the nightclub door with friends that I knew did the door. So I looked at it from the outside, and I kind of made the three-dimensional monster more into a two-dimensional cartoon. I made it more real. So rather than have this big fantasy of what it was to be a doorman, I got close to it and realized it was a job. It was a job that people did, and they were protected. To an extent, they were protected by the law. They had a great camaraderie. They were protected by each other. They were protected by, the license of the club. And they weren't fighting all the time. It wasn't like someone was trying to kill you every single night. You had a lot of violence over a long period of time. So I broke the fear down into smaller, more manageable components, and then eventually I got a couple of jobs on kind of peripheral doors, doors which weren't very violent, doors that were on the periphery of the city. And then eventually moved into this place called Buster's, which was one of the main nightclubs in the centre. And then grew massively from there. I was just, I was working with such legendary characters, and I was so hungry for knowledge and for information. And these people taught me, not just about physical violence. That was the least thing I learned. I learned to manage my own feelings. I learned to align myself. I learned to communicate, and I learned to use my voice as a calling tool or as a weapon. I learned to use my hands as a fence. I learned to control my own adrenaline with diaphragmatic breathing and with understanding, and I learned to understand and control other people's adrenaline. I could climb inside people and switch their adrenaline on. I could switch it off. I could make it go faster. I could make it go slower, just with the use of touch and with my voice. So I started to learn to control other people just by my understanding of what adrenaline was. So then I started to study adrenaline. I started to study physiology and psychology. And I started to understand the power of sound, the power of the voice as a weapon to hurt people, as a weapon to control people. Ultimately, where I am now, working more in the shamanic area, using the voice as a healing tool, aligned sound with good intention, sound that comes from a place of love. At the time, I used to use sound as a way of damaging people, vibration. The Egyptians would call it heka, which means magic sound, magic words. Or the Japanese would call it kotodama, the use of magic sound, which we do every day. We all do. Every one of us does that. We use sounds and symbols to order a pizza. We use sounds and symbols to buy a house. We use sounds and symbols in business. That's what we do. The world we live in is created with sounds and symbols. So in the very early days, I'm aware as I'm saying this, I should write all this down because I've not written this down anywhere yet. There's a good book here, isn't there? But I'm aware that I started to be very excited about study, and I started to really study this more and more. But that's basically how I did it. I identified the things I was afraid of, and I've traced those things back to their very core, and then I cleaned them. So if you imagine ultimately, if you placed an inner tube into water and you applied air pressure to find out where the leaks are, that's what I was doing. I was putting myself under pressure to find out where my own leaks were. But what most people do is they try to fix the leaks at the level of the biggest bubble. So if you look in the bowl of water and the bubbles rise up, people try to fix their problems at the level of the biggest bubble. What I was doing was tracing the bubbles all the way back to find out where the leak was. So if you've got jealousy, or if you've got anger, or you've got rage, or you've got envy, or whatever it is, most people try to fix those emotions at the level of the emotion, but it doesn't exist at the level of the emotion. It has a leak, has a root cause. So what I started to do, rather than just get into fight after fight and try and overcome this feeling of fear, I started to trace back where those fears come from, and I started to trace the bubbles right back to the genesis, to the initiating leak. And that took me 30 years to be able to do that, and I've done that through writing, through theatre, through film, when I talk about writing, I'm talking about brutally honest writing, and really tracing back the genesis of where my fear came from. And I trace a lot of my fears back to, some of it back to genetics, some of it I was born with, some of it came from being abused when I was a kid. I was sexually abused. That left me with a lot of dissonance, left me with a lot of rage, left me with a lot of shame, left me with a lot of guilt. massive confusion, because I was told implicitly at the age of 11 that no one can be trusted, that the world can't be trusted, the people you love can't be trusted, especially the people you love. This was told to me by a man that I idolized, who groomed me and then sexually assaulted me. So he gave me that as a cognition. That was his twisted gift, and that left me in the world feeling that I couldn't even trust God. Even God had abandoned me in my mind. Even my source had abandoned me. So I eventually traced all my fears back, most of them back to that one place. And so I started to talk about that, to write about it, to do plays about it. And by doing that, I was able to bring my dissonance into a narrative that I could understand and control, into a narrative that I could share, into a narrative that I could put in front of an audience. And if I don't know how many people will listen to this, but even if there was just 1,000 people listening to this, I'm sure there's more, but even if there's only 1,000 people, 1,000 people will help me to clean that dissonance and to clean that stain that's been left by this person. And also that my story will encourage other people to share their story. It will create an allowing. I know I'm kind of going back out again, but that's how it started, and it continues to this day. The level I'm at now is that fear doesn't exist. It is a perception, it's a cognition, and it can be changed. Perceptions can be changed, but not easily. Perceptions create identities, and identities live. They become personalities or demons. What the Old Testament would call a divide. The word demon comes from the word divide. So if we get divided against ourselves, we become split personality. So these split personalities become identities in themselves. So when we come to dissolve old cognitions, they fight for their lives. So that's where we come to what Muhammad called the greater jihad, the internal struggle, and what the Hindus would call the battle of Guru, etc. You know, the fight against nescience or perception. So it all ends up as an internal battle. Even if I'm standing on a nightclub door, I'm not really fighting people there. I'm just fighting my own feelings and beliefs and perceptions and cognitions. And what's exciting is that they can be changed.
So if you want to find your greater purpose or recognize the potential you have in your life, would you then recommend someone to confront their own fears and challenge their own demons? And that's the path through which you kind of diminish your blockages to become a better person and having more strength and stuff?
Yeah, I would say that the only way to find your dharma, the only way to find your true purpose is to clear the fog. And the fog is old beliefs, old conditioning, you know, our social mores, you know, all of the beliefs we've brought up with, our religious dogma. We've got to go into all that, and we've got to bypass all that, and we've got to look at the things we're afraid of looking at, and behind those things, our dharma is sitting waiting. It's still. It's perfectly still, and it's informative. It's like a huge divine sat-nav. And from that place, our dharma comes. But to do that, we have to go through all of the things that we have to kind of, what Krishna calls kill our parents. We have to kill our teachings and our beliefs, and all of the things we've been told that are real and that are true and that are unchangeable. We have to challenge those. And they normally take the form of a fear. So if we try to challenge our religious beliefs, we feel fear. If we try to change the social beliefs, we feel fear. If we try to challenge the social beliefs, we feel fear. If we try to, step outside of our culture, we feel fear, or we're made to feel fear. So these are the areas, that we need to confront. And behind those fears, this is what the Bhagavad Gita is about. It's saying behind this line of fear, behind this warring enemy, is your kingdom, is your freedom, is your dharma. So yeah, the first place to look is
at the things you're afraid of. And if you want to know what you're afraid of, just look at your reactions to the world. If you're angry at people on the television or in the news, or if you're judgmental, or if you're cynical, or if you're jealous, or you're envious, they're all fears. So we start to see the world as a mirror. And we start to look and think, well, everything is scripture. Every time I get an emotional pilot light of envy or greed or fear, then I know that whoever's created that is my teacher. They're showing me where I can work. And if we can find our deepest fear, what Geoff would call the chief feature, if we can find the deepest fear, the thing we're most afraid of, behind that deepest fear or behind that chief feature is the greatest access to light or to Dharma. So yeah, it's about being brutally honest and saying, well, how do I want to live and what's stopping me from doing that? We have this idea that the government stops us, or that our teachers stop us, or that our family, our wife, our children, our husband, our environment, our potential, we have an idea that things are stopping us from achieving our goal, and they are external, but they're not external. What's stopping us from achieving our goal are internal beliefs, and they have external representations, but they all exist internally. It's a bit like if you was at a cinema and you're watching a film at the cinema, and suddenly the screen started, the picture on the screen started to spin or tilt, or the sound wasn't right. You would look silly if you went to the screen and tried to fix the picture at the level of the screen, because you recognise that the picture doesn't exist at the level of the screen. The picture exists actually at the level of the projector, and we are the projector. So the light coming through is perfect, and the screen is illusory. It just projects what's on the film. So all we need to do is change the film, and the film are our beliefs and our cognitions. So what I say to people is the moment you project down and you find blame in the world, you're trying to fix the film at the level of the screen, and it won't work. What you can do is you can recognize that these are all projections from your beliefs, your perceptions, your cognitions, and they can be changed. That's what again, if you think about John Matters, he talks about the fact that reality is based on perception, but perception can be changed. Now, I don't want this to sound wishy-washy, because I practice muscular spirituality. Muscular spirituality means changing the things in my life that are not right. That's about palate. That's about what I eat, what I drink, what I ingest. It's about my influences. It's about my impressions. It's about the people around me. It's about my controlling my thoughts. It's about changing myself on a cellular level. Every Bible you look at, from the Old Testament to the New Testament to the Bhagavad Gita, the Guru Granth Sahib, the Tao Te Ching, all of them are talking about the internal schematic. They are all parables. If you look at Genesis, if you look at the Old Testament, for instance, the 5 books of Moses, from Genesis up to Deuteronomy. If you look at the 5 books of Moses, or the Old Testament, the whole thing is about changing the internal schematic. It's about going from ignorance to nirvana, to the promised land. But it's all about the internal alignment. And the stories are just parables, to enable us not to change the world, but to change ourselves. So and we locate where the goal is by looking at where we're afraid. And then we develop techniques. We place ourselves in front of teachers. We study in order to overcome these fears, in order to confront these fears. And each time we confront a fear, we convert it. We're able to expand our second body, or our second self, and we're able to open more rooms. There's a lovely thing in the New Testament which says, and I see the New Testament very much as a schematic, rather than a dogmatic thing. But it says, in my Father's house there are many rooms, and the word Father comes from the word source. It means source. So in the source there are infinite rooms. There are many rooms. So, and what it's saying is we can create as many rooms as we want in our reality. We are already doing it. We're just doing it accidentally, and we're doing it ad hoc. We're not really creating the rooms deliberately that we want. We're creating negative rooms from negative beliefs. So what I do in my teaching is that I create new rooms with new beliefs by dissolving the old beliefs, and I do that by confronting the fears that keep those beliefs alive, and then I create new rooms and I access those new rooms. But first of all, I have to create the state inside me. Once I create the state, then I can create the room or the reality. And it's very exciting because you literally find yourself in rooms that were never there, but were always there. So suddenly you've created a new room, and you might be sat in somewhere like BAFTA in London, and you're surrounded by the greatest storytellers on the planet. You know, the greatest storytellers in the world. These are the new script writers, the new scriptures. But you're aware that you've created that room. You've created that room by creating that state in you. And when you create the state of acceptance in you, you create the room. But again, I know that sounds fantastical, but that's all about going to war with a belief that says you're not worth that. That's not possible. There's an us and a them. You know, that's not accessible. That's for posh people or you know, but that's for the elite or whatever you want to say. But it's about changing those beliefs. It's about challenging those beliefs and then doing the work. So, and that's where it's difficult. And like I said, I mentor people from all over the world, and I've seen people kill themselves before they will challenge these beliefs and these fears. So it's not like hypothesis or kind of excitable theology. This is the reality that we're creating every single day, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of courage.
And our natural tendency seems to be like when you're afraid or when you're depressed, you rather just want to turn away and not face those perceptions. Yeah. And so, could you tell us what are the most common problems with your clients, and how do you help them with that?
It's mostly about beliefs. It's just about beliefs. Am I allowed to swear on this? Is it awkward to swear on here, or would you rather I didn't swear?
Swearing is fine with me. Jordan?
I'm only swearing as an example. But for instance, I worked with a guy.
Totally fine.
I worked with a guy that was very successful and a very beautiful man. And I felt a lot of love with him. And he said, I was talking about this idea of working from source, or working from the Father, or working from a place of love. And he listened for a little while, and he said, that's all well and good, yeah, but in the world I live in, he said, it's full of cunts. He said, this wouldn't work with these people. I am surrounded by cunts. And I listened to him for a little while, and I felt this other personality take over with him. And then I put my hand on his chest, and I said to him, that's very interesting. That's a very interesting perception. And he said, what? And I said, that's a very powerful perception. And of course, when I spoke to this brilliant, gorgeous man, I realised he thought he was a cunt, because that's how he'd been brought up. He'd been brought up with no love. He was a hugely successful businessman, but very unhappy, because he felt that he was a cunt and people would take advantage of him, and he was surrounded by cunts. And I said to him, if you can challenge that perception, you won't be surrounded by cunts. Because I'm not. I said, there's none of that in my life. I said, I'm surrounded by very beautiful people. I'm surrounded by artistic people, by creative people, because I don't see myself like that. I said, but I understand it. And I said, I know it's true, because when I didn't believe you could trust anybody, I was surrounded by people that I couldn't trust. I was surrounded by violence. When I felt that I needed to protect myself against the world, that perception and an untamed imagination created nightclubs, pubs, fights in bars, fights at christenings, fights at weddings, fights in the car. Everywhere I went, there was fights. Everywhere I went, there was violence. And I literally created establishments that filled with people that wanted to fight me. That's how powerful perception is if you let it go with your imagination. So I said, when I realized I'd created that with my perception and with my imagination and obviously with my physical work, when I realized that it's me that created it and it was me that was maintaining it, I dissolved it over a period of years, and I started to create something else. I literally changed the room I was in. That room still exists for other people, but it doesn't exist for me. It has no existence in my life. So most of the time, I struggle with people that it's really all about their beliefs, and their beliefs come from perceptions, and these perceptions have an actual existence in their body as a cognition. So I help them through listening to their sound. I listen to their sound. Not like if if you're an expert with cars, you can listen to sound. You can listen to a car engine, and you can tell if it's misfiring. I listen to people. I'm present with people, and I listen to their sound, and I watch their body language, and I look at where they're slightly mistiming, and I'll pick up on the word. I say, "What's that word? Why are you saying that? Why have you got that belief?" Like with this particular guy when he mentioned that he was surrounded by friends, I automatically picked up on that, and I challenged that, and I said, qualify that for me. Why are you surrounded by that and I'm not? What makes you different? And how come you're very wealthy but you're still unhappy? And the more wealthy you get, the more unhappy you get. Because he didn't trust people because he'd been brought up with not enough love. And yet the guy was in himself, he was a very, very loving man. So I will pick up on their sound, I'll see where they're mistiming, and then I'll challenge that. And it's very disconcerting for people because they'll come something that they didn't know was there. Sometimes they'll come to you and they'll say, I'm 95% there. And then when you talk to them, you realise they're only 5% there. 95% of them is out of sync. And that means massive changes, huge changes. And it's changes in their life, changes that they've got to, they've got to go to war with their addictions. They've got to go to war with their old beliefs. They've got to trace that bubble all the way back to the leak and look it in the eye. And they might have to go through 6 or 7 different bubbles before they get to the actual genesis. So it's mostly about belief. Some people, 50% of our perceptions we're born with, and 50% of our perceptions we learn, but 95% of our perceptions are unconscious. So it means 95% of the time people are making decisions and living their life on unconscious perceptions. So they're not living free lives. They're not free. They're not free in the world. They think they're free, but they're not free because they are living off perceptions that have never been challenged. So I will help them to identify perceptions. I will challenge the perceptions. I will ask them to qualify their perceptions and show them that their perceptions have no reality other than the reality that they've given it. They've put breath into it. And then once they do that, they'll start gradually working on that. And then depending on who I'm working with and what their issue is, I will get them, I've got specific exercises that I'll do to help them dissolve that. So Krishna, if you look at the Hindu texts, the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which comes from the Puranas and the Vedas, about 6,000 years old. It talks a lot about the fact that we create our reality. They have gods for this. They have a God that creates reality, a God that maintains reality, and a God that dissolves reality. But what the parable is actually saying is that we create our reality with our beliefs. We maintain our reality with our beliefs, and we dissolve our reality with our beliefs. And we see that literally in the world. So you see people create a good relationship with a belief. They maintain it with a belief, and then you often watch them destroy it with a belief, with a jealous belief or an envious belief. Same as businesses, I see people build businesses up with a belief, and they maintain it with a belief, and then they shatter it with a belief. They shatter it with the belief that there's not enough, so they get greedy and they don't pay the taxes or they don't pay their suppliers. So you watch people literally building realities up, maintaining realities and dissolving realities, but most of them aren't doing it deliberately. And they don't understand sometimes why they've created this negative reality, why they're maintaining it. And sometimes they've created an exciting reality and they don't understand why they've lost it, why it's dissolved. So my job is to show them, that the genesis is them. They are the inlet and outlet. They are the inlet and the outlet for divinity. They are the conduit through which reality is made, very literally. And then that gives them some control over that. So I help them to, normally when they meet people, they don't really know who they are. They think they're their ego, or they think that they're their body, or they think that they are their mind.
but they're not. The body is a vehicle, and the mind is a substratum, like a backboard with programs on, and they think they're the programs, but the programs are just programs. They think that they're the egoic voice, but they're not. The egoic voice is normally a false ego, and that voice can change 10, 20 times, 30 times over a day. Gurdjieff believed that people had hundreds of subpersonalities, or what Eckhart Tolle would call pain bodies, or Dante Alighieri would call them shades or shadows. Freud would call them shadows. Dante would call them shades. So they are not that identity. That's not who they are. But at the back of that, there is an observer or a witness, and that's who they really are. So ultimately, if I'm working with people, I'm really just helping them to identify who they are. So when the lights are off and they're on their own in the dark, they know who they are. Most people you meet, when they're alone and they're on their own in the dark, they don't even trust their own hands. So I'd help them to identify who they are. But that's quite frightening for people, because to find out who they are, they have to identify who they're not. And we're talking then about consciousness. So we're opening people up to consciousness, and the false ego is terrified of consciousness and will always attack consciousness. So we will be attacked internally by the false ego, and we will sometimes be attacked externally when we literally just start to change things in our reality. So when I gave up alcohol, for instance, I gave up alcohol purely as an exercise in cerebral strengthening. I did it as an exercise in killing addictions and just developing mental strength. And it was social suicide. I can't tell you how many friends I lost, how many friends I had who thought I was pretentious, or thought I was above myself, or thought I'd gone soft because I gave up alcohol. So, and I got attacked for giving up alcohol. I gave up meat later on as well. As an exercise, my body was asking for a finer fuel. It wanted a less dense fuel, and it wanted less karma from other animals, and that was a personal thing. It's not something I'm evangelical about. It's just something that was intuited to me, but people didn't like it. People were upset by it. Suddenly I was different. So when we start to change ourselves, our reality will change, and we will often be attacked by our own internal monologues, by the subvocalization, by the false egos, by the false personalities, and sometimes we'll be attacked outside, because our beliefs have representation outside as well. So it's really interesting. So I know we're getting into the deeper level of it now, but this is what I'm saying. This is why it's difficult. Ultimately, people don't know who they are. So I help them find a clear line through using enthusiasm. So I enthuse them. To enthuse means to connect them to spirit, or I inspire them, or I will align them using my word, using the rhythms of my sound, using a line sound, using sound from the right intention. I will help them to align to their very, very best game. I will help them to align to the room maker, to the part in them that makes the rooms, that maintains the rooms, that dissolves the rooms. And I let them see who that is. And then once they've seen their best game, or their authentic self, or their soul body, or whatever you want to call it, once they see that and they identify that, then the job is to help them bring that forward and make space for that, and give it more housing in the carapace, in the physical carapace. But to give it more housing, the authentic self, we have to get rid of all of the old fears, the old terrors, and we have to convert them. And that's, that is a very specific spiritual exercise. And if you look at somebody like Eckhart Tolle, who did The Power of Now, or The New Earth, his book is specifically a technique designed just to find that, just to find the authentic self, just to dissolve the pain bodies. And it's the pain bodies, again, and it's the pain bodies that are creating the realities that we don't want, or the shadows, or again, you could call them demons or divides. They're creating the realities unconsciously in the background against our will, and then maintaining them. So there are specific books, and Eckhart Tolle's book is I think a 6,000-year-old technique. It goes right back to Hermes Trismegistus with the pyramids, Hermetics. It's got a very, very long heritage, but it's also, the technique is also mentioned in all the Bibles, in the different parables. So the exciting thing is the information's out there, but it's not just about having the information. It's, as Geoff said, it's about doing the work. Are we doing the work? And doing the work is always about confronting the things that we're afraid of, and dissolving the things we're afraid of, and making more and more space for our authentic self. And when we have the authentic self in situ, then it's just a matter of what room do I want to open? What do I want to experience? Where do I want to go? How do I want to live? And then, my I'm not saying this is everybody's job, but my own dharma at this moment in time is to try and put this information out to people in the best way possible. Not to say to them that you must change, but just to say to them that if you're struggling, if you're waking at 4 a.m. and you're depressed and you're in a bad marriage or a bad house or a bad job, you can change it. I am definite about that because I have the proof. So my job is to say to people it's possible. And then their job is to go out and do the search. And then once they do the search, do the work, and then be the proof, be the proof themselves. Until they've proved to themselves, it won't be real. So I hopefully will excite people to find their own proof. I've got my own proof and I can show that to people, but I want to excite them to find their own proof and start like I did with very small things. Start by confronting the things around you that you're afraid of, and start to convert that latent energy, that egoic kind of dense energy into something more profound, something lighter. And then we're getting into alchemy then. So that's where I am.
That's amazing.
Can you speak more about the power of sound and word and how you used it when you were a bouncer versus how you use it now with your clients?
Yeah. As a bouncer, I fell into it accidentally. I was a nice guy. I was polite. I was articulate. I was not really an archetypal bouncer. I was 11 stone and I was receding. But I had a very powerful anger, which had come from this abuse when I was young. I was defending. I was fighting the whole world. So the first time I understood the power of sound was when a fight kicked off outside the club one day, and I started to posture. I made myself very big with my arms splayed, and I started to shout and scream and attack and say, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'll find out where you live. I'll knock your door down. I'll bite your fucking nose off. I'll spit it down your fucking throat. I'll find out where you work. You think I can't find out where you work? I'll find out where you work." And I started to just use sound aligned to bad intent, but to a definite intent. And I started to see people just fall away. People just used to fall apart because my sound triggered terror in them. It triggered adrenals. It triggered. I was able to take a guy on the door, for instance. I was able to, if I got a guy in me and I postured and I said to him, he's threatening to stab me, and I said to him, I'm going to find out where you work. I'm going to find out where you live. I'm going to come around your house when you're having tea with your mum. Now, what I would do in that situation, what I'm actually doing is I'm using sound to project this person out of his body into the future. So I've sent him to the future and I've given him a quick glimpse of what I'm going to do. And then he comes back to the present and he's terrified because I've shown him the future. So I know it sounds weird, but I've forced him to time travel. And this is for his benefit, not for mine. It's for my benefit because I don't want to be in a physical fight, but it's for his benefit because I'm a seasoned fighter, and if he stepped into the arena with me, he's in trouble. This is what we do every night. It's our job. We're professionals. So I used to make people time travel. I would take them out of the present moment and into a potential future, and that would trigger the adrenals. They'd get the fight or flight syndrome. It would trigger the flight syndrome. I would create deliberate space between us so that they weren't, if you're too close to people, it triggers the fight syndrome and they will fight. If you create space and you posture and you make sound, it triggers the flight response and they want to run away. So I became a master at operating other people's adrenaline. I became very good at taking them out of their body and placing them in hellish futures or showing them potential hellish futures. And that was just through the use of sound. Sometimes I would use sound and touch to calm someone's adrenaline down. If I thought they were aggressive but not active, and I could tell that by their body language and by how they reacted themselves, by how they reacted to my touch. If I felt there was a chance to talk them down, then I would use quiet sound, aligned and certain, but I would use quiet sound and touch to switch their adrenaline off and calm their adrenaline down and talk them out of this heightened arousal. So I would use sound in that way. I mean, I'd use sound. I remember falling over on the dance floor. I went into a fight in the nightclub, and I grabbed a guy off at the fight, and I tripped over with him, and I fell over, and about 50 people ran at me at once. They were going to kill me, and I stood up and I postured. I used really dramatic sound, and I controlled 50 people with sound, just with sound. And I stopped them all in their tracks. I literally climbed inside them and operated them. I mean, we all used to do this. This is what we did. But I became very good at it. I practiced it. Later, as a healer, I would use sound and touch to align people to their own source and bring that flow of grace through them. And I would use sound to show them the potential of their own healing. So I would trigger their own grace or their own essence. And that would start healing. And I would also use words to project them out of their present hell into a potential future. So I would time travel them again. I would say, look, I was where you was, and this is where I am now, and this is what I did, and it's possible. Look, it's very possible. So you literally, without sounding too dramatic, you can literally talk people out of suicide just with the use of sound. If they trust your word, if your word is aligned, if they trust your vow, and the vow is just, the promise, it's a specific sound we make. When we make a promise or a vow, it's a specific sound we make. And if we're very good at making that sound and keeping that vow, we become very powerful in the world. Because obviously the whole money exchange is based on the exchange of energy and the use of the vow sound. That's the whole monetary system is based on that. Money doesn't actually physically exist other than as an exchange of energy. And we have ledgers to for us to know who is owed what. It doesn't even have the decency to have gold bullion as a commodity anymore. So money is just, I think, it's just an exchange of energy with a perceived value, and it's backed by a vow sound. So I would use that to heal people as well. I would use that to heal people. That's why programs like this are very important, because it allows me to deliver scripture or script or words to people that are troubled. I'm interested in people that are troubled. And I don't need to ever meet them. I don't need to ever hear from them. I just need to let this sound vibrate through them and align them to their own father, to their own source, and encourage them to start learning to use their own body so that they can create. They're in rooms at the moment that don't suit them, they're not happy with. They're in the wrong rooms, and I'm trying to encourage them to use sound and touch and action to create better rooms. So we can dissolve our own. If we think about perceptions and cognitions, we can use the internal monologue or internal sound to dissolve those beliefs as well. So if you've got internal perceptions and beliefs, mostly they come up unconsciously, and they act through our body. They incarnate us, and we create unconsciously. If we don't want to use those perceptions, we can use internal sound to dissolve those as well. So if someone comes up and says, yeah, I'm going to go on the internet, let's go and access sexual pornography and let's look at the sexual porn, we can challenge that. We can say, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't suit me. That is a waste of my energy. That is me drinking from a poisoned well. So we don't need to do that. And this shadow will fight for its right to drink from that poisoned well, and we will challenge it with sub-vocalization. So we can change things on the inside, and we can change things on the outside. We can heal on the outside, we can heal on the inside with sound. So I've literally used my sub-vocalization to talk myself into illnesses when I was younger, because I didn't understand it. And then I've used the same sub-vocalization, but from a positive perspective, to heal myself. So I have made myself ill. I'm talking about illness that shows up on x-rays, illness that shows up in blood tests. And I've used the same sound, but from a different perspective, from a positive perspective, from an aligned and certain perspective, to reverse those results. It's hugely powerful, but it's the same as anything else. You're not going to be a great judo player by reading Neil Adams' A Life in Judo, are you? It might excite you to go to a judo club, but to be an Olympian, you have to train like an Olympian. So we're talking about the higher game, but that's accessible to everybody. It's accessible to anybody if they want to educate themselves and do the work.
Do the work, yeah.
So I practice Kota Dharma. That's one of the things I do. I practice the use of sound. And everybody I meet, I have the opportunity to do that.
That's fantastic. It's an amazing story. Your transformation is, I think, really inspiring. Is there a place where people can find more about your teachings, your scripts, your Dharma? Because it's, I think a lot of people listening to this would love to know more.
You can. I've got a website, www.geoffthompson.com. And there's about 100 free podcasts on there that we put out to people if they want to listen to podcasts. There's about 100 articles on there they can read. So all of my stuff's there. I'm on Geoff Thompson 44. On Twitter. I think that's my tag name. So I've got a Twitter account. There's a Facebook thing as well that my son runs for me. So there's a few places, but mostly geoffthompson.com, and that's Geoff with a G. Geoff and Thompson with a P. So they can access my stuff there. We have a shop there with books on, and any free events we do are on there, and the mentoring I do is advertised on there as well. So they can access it through there.
All right, fantastic. Well, I think that's we got shot through that hour super quickly.
Yeah, it's 12:15. It's 6:15. It's mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a blast just listening to your story.
Yeah, you could dance a lot of information in one setting. It's wow.
Thank you, thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk as well, and I like to plant seeds. It's really interesting. You've got a fantastic website. Your resources I find really inspiring.
Thank you.
So it's a great place for me to plant seeds. It's fertile soil.
Yeah, we're really happy to republish some of your articles. And
thank you, Martin. Thank you.
And after this talk, I'm definitely gonna confront more of my fears. I've been doing that for a while now, but there's much more room to work.
Yeah, it's how far do you want to go down the rabbit hole? It's very exciting, and what's interesting for me as well is that every time I confront a major fear, every time I dissolve a major fear, I am given more instruction. I have ascended masters around me that bring me more instruction through books, through articles, and I'm given a bigger platform. But the information comes, to me when I do the work and I confront things and I face fears and I dissolve fears. More and more instruction comes to me. I understand more. I'm able to discern more. I'm able to see and feel and perceive more. My reality changes. Every time I dissolve a fear, my reality changes. It looks different. Everything looks different. It becomes more and more exciting.
Yeah, I know. I was already compiling a list of my fears as we were going through this talk. So you've definitely planted some seeds.
Thank you. Well, I've got a book called Fear the Friend of Exceptional People. So if you want a copy, either of you, just send me an email and an address, and I'll put a little package in the post for you, some stuff you can look at, some of the stuff I've done.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, just email me with your address and I'll get Sharon. My wife runs we've got like a mail order company, so she'll send them out to you as a gift.
Oh, I'll definitely do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Geoff.
And thank you everyone for listening. And I hope you enjoy the show.
Thanks, guys.
That's a wrap.
Thanks for listening. If you appreciate the High Existence podcast, the best way to support it is to invest in yourself by acquiring one or more of our self-development tools at store.highexistence.com. Use the code WISDOM at checkout to get a huge 25% off the 30 Challenges to Enlightenment course. You can also leave reviews on iTunes or share it with your friends on social media. Thank you so much for tuning in, and cheers to a high existence.